Yeah.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our quarterly speaker series and networking event, the Vancouver Hardware Meetup. To give you a little bit of background about these events, we are a forum for local hardware developers, product developers, engineers, makers, entrepreneurs, and funding angels to pull together minds from all corners of the hardware community in Vancouver to help connect makers to funders. My name is Madison. I am the organizer of Vancouver Hardware Meetup. I took over as organizer a little over a year ago, but these events have actually been going on for about 6 years now. So we've, to the left, you can kind of get a sample of some of the topics that we've covered. Last year, we covered technology for conservation. We've done a couple events dedicated to robotics and machine learning on the edge. And our last event was hosted in October, dedicated to the dark side of tech. To give you some preparation for this event, we do have a code of conduct. We are committed to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone at our events, regardless of gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, age, or religion. So any comments in our live chat of a harassing nature will not be tolerated, and anyone violating these rules will be removed from the discussion. So I work for MistyWest. MistyWest is the organizer of these events. We're a Vancouver-based engineering design consultancy that exists to create novel technologies that enable a healthier planet and bring prosperity to all humankind. We focus on intelligent connected devices. We do firmware and electrical engineering and a lot of early stage product development and prototyping. And today's event is going to be on the future of IoT on the cloud. So we're going to be having discussions around the future of IoT developments, conversations around security, machine learning on the edge, and what else we might be able to expect for the technological advancements. Joining today's discussion, our panelists include Justin Lamb. He is a software developer and tech lead here at MistyWest. Amar Balutkar, he is the IoT practice lead at Quest Global. Billie Whitehouse, she's the CEO, designer, and director at Wearable X. And Edona, she is a lawyer and specializes in, I want to say it the right way, but she works for AIOT Canada, specializing a lot around technical advancements and security with IoT. And today's moderator is Leigh Christie, who is the co-founder of MistyWest. So now for today's session, the format is going to go roughly, once I'm done these slides, we'll do 15 minutes of panelist introductions. We'll do about a 35-minute moderated discussion with Leigh, and the remainder of the session will be the live Q&A with questions from the live chat, and then we'll do some closing out slides and some thank yous. And if you guys want to learn more about Vancouver Hardware Meetup, we do have a group on meetup.com. We have over 1,000 members now. You can also follow us at MistyWestYVR on Twitter and Instagram, or you can follow the hashtag Vancouver Hardware Meetup online.
How's everyone doing? Give us a shout in the chat. Say how you're feeling. Drop an emoji. I like those rocket ship ones. Those are pretty fun. I hope everyone's doing really well. We have obviously a huge turnout today, which is super exciting. It's definitely a silver lining to COVID is that getting a virtual conference together has a lot more engagement, let's say, than they used to. You obviously have already been slightly introduced to our panelists today, but we're going to do a quick round of introduction. Yeah, I see a rocket ship there. Thanks, Dan. We're going to do a slight, like a reintroduction here. So, and I'll start by introducing myself. I'm an engineer, inventor. I love to create new things, and one of the things I created is the type of company that I would like to work at, and that's MistyWest. I'm a co-founder of MistyWest, and our goal is to help achieve the sustainable development goals through engineering and innovation. Particularly with respect to the creation of intelligent and connected devices, which is really just a long-winded way of saying we like to work on IoT stuff. Maybe we sometimes try to avoid that as a branding marketing term, but in truth, that is, the industry, it's become the industry standard term. Justin, why don't you introduce yourself now? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was having some internet issues, but I'm Justin. I'm a software engineer at MistyWest. In the past 5 years I've been here, I've worked on a wide range of projects from agricultural robots to handheld medical devices. As Leigh said, in recent years, we've been focusing on helping our clients add more value to their projects through connected devices. So I've helped design and implement the cloud infrastructure for those projects.
Thank you. Let's go counterclockwise. Billie, go ahead.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Great to meet you all. My name is Billie Whitehouse. I'm the CEO and founder of Wearable X. I'm actually a trained designer, so I specialize in integrating electronics into apparel, and my background really is in fashion. I sort of fell into this world. What that means is that I've built products like vibrating underpants for couples in long-distance relationships and yoga pants that can read and understand your body's orientation and provide real-time haptic feedback. You can insert all of the inappropriate jokes as you would like.
Go ahead, Edona.
Well, I can't beat that introduction. So I'm a lawyer, so that just will bring the just complete boredom for the rest of the audience here. So no exciting. I haven't developed any exciting products, but I am a product liability lawyer, so I advise on products. I'm a lawyer at Boren Ladner Gervais and a partner there. For those that don't know, Boren Ladner is Canada's largest law firm. And today I wear another hat. I have the pleasure of sitting on the board of AIoT Canada. For those that are joining us today and taking time to listen in, if you are not a member of AIoT Canada, it's free. So you can become a member and join the ecosystem. It's a tech cluster. I know one of our other board members is on joining here, Walter. So join in.
All right, Amar, go ahead.
Hey, hi all. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Amar Balutkar, based out of Seattle. I lead the IoT practice at Quest Global. And so I'm, of course, an engineer at heart for the last 15 odd years. And last 5 years kind of focusing on IoT and AI technologies. So Quest Global, we are about a 20-year-old product engineering services company. And we kind of cater to some of the large OEMs in healthcare, transportation, aerospace, etc., which are kind of like the traditional industries. And looking forward to participate in this particular conversation today.
All right, so we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. So we've had a few people drop on and off a couple times now. So just to warn the audience, if you see people dropping off, don't worry. We've got some people working in the background to bring them back on. So every once in a while, I'll be checking my phone for notifications of anything I need to do on my end to keep things moving along smoothly. But let's jump right into it. So yeah, we're gonna kick it off with the first question here. Unless there's any other housekeeping we have to cover. Did I forget anything? I don't think we did. All right, so here we go. Just to break right into it, right off the bat, I'd like each panelist to just say just a single bold prediction about the next 5 to 10 years of the future of IoT on the cloud. What do you think is going to happen? What's the world going to look like 5 to 10 years from now? And keep in mind, 10 years ago, people barely knew what the cloud was. IoT was barely a thing at all 10 years ago. Okay, so a lot can change in 5 to 10 years. So I'd like to hear one bold prediction from each of you, starting with Billie. Go ahead, Billie.
Whew, so much pressure going first. I'm more of a product person, but let me start with the product and then see how I think it goes into a bigger ecosystem. I think we're going to see like much more soft interfaces that interact with one another. Oh, did you lose me? No, there you go. That interact with one another without much input from human behavior. I think that is going to be a big part of how we need to have infrastructure work, and that lots of smart devices communicating with each other in bigger networks so that the human doesn't have to input as much.
Nice. All right, Amar, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I certainly echo what Billie said, right? I mean the way that I'm looking at it is that so there are two paradigms that are kind of coming out, right? One is pervasive computing, which is basically like computation anywhere, right? And whether it is on the edge, on the cloud, on the hybrid systems, anywhere, right? And the other aspect is more of ambient computing, whereby you don't have to open up your laptop or your mobile phone to kind of work on it. but it is basically like certain computations that are happening, and they are just providing you the result, right? A very good example of it is, for example, like Alexa, right? Like, I mean, you just call it for it, you ask it some questions, and you get it, right? And if you see the kind of trends like, say, smart mirrors and so on, it is kind of going into that area, that space whereby you are kind of making it more ambient, you more pervasive, right? Whereby there is no specific endpoint, but it is almost like it, the intelligence is everywhere.
Nice. That's awesome. Whoa. You guys getting feedback on me? Oh,
You're echoing.
No, it seems to be okay.
Yeah, that was pretty. I got some pretty wild feedback there. Hopefully, not everyone's getting that. Edona, go ahead. It's your turn to talk about a bold prediction for the future in the next 5 to 10 years of IoT on the cloud.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm going to sort of stick my head in that sort of space and get out of sort of what may happen in terms of from a product development point of view. I do think, before I get to the law, I do think you're going to get more of a, as with any innovation, you're going to have a higher adoption as we go forward of smart tech in general. And with that, I think comes a very important component of consumer awareness and consumer expectation. And I think that's going to be a very important component as we move forward. But part and parcel, I think, of that narrative, I think it's going to be this issue of consumer safety around these products that go in the marketplace. But that only sort of captures a subset of smart products, and only those that are used by consumers. But I think in the same sort of paradigm, you're going to have the other non-consumer applications of smart products that embed all of these technologies, whether it's AI on an IoT device, like a simple old IoT device. I think all of this is going to come into the realm of where do you see whether it's Canada and other jurisdictions, and I think it's going to be a broader adoption of minimum standards and legislation and regulation around IoT. I think in Canada we certainly don't have it. I don't know the makeup of everybody joining us. But those in Canada will tell you in the industry will tell you that we don't have IoT specific legislation. So the way that we're operating currently, and we have been in, say, in the last 5 years, is very much specific regulators that care about that area of their little jurisdiction is sort of starting to think of minimum standards, minimum guidance. We've seen that from Transport Canada for transport applications, certainly with Health Canada on connected devices. And I think sort of each of the regulators are trying to sort of find their feet in their specific area, preparing themselves for the world of connected devices, regardless of the industry. I think we're going to see a move towards more IoT-specific legislation, but that's just my prediction.
Okay, thank you. That gives a really unique perspective. It's actually the first time we've had a lawyer on our panel, and I wish we'd done it sooner, right? Because you're thinking a lot.
For good reason.
Yeah, you really are thinking a lot about stuff that, frankly, the engineers don't think about, right? And so I think and even the business people, entrepreneurs, are not thinking about. So very, very unique perspective, and I appreciate your input. Justin, how about you? What's your big, bold 5 to 10 year prediction for the future of IoT on the cloud?
My prediction would be decentralization. So a lot of IoT, basically right now we have the big players. We have AWS, Azure, and GCP. But they're providing a single bottleneck for any failures that can happen. So blockchain is a big buzzword, but if we do see it happen, that'll be a huge disruption to the industry. There's a few challenges that need to be addressed. One is the increasing number of transactions that as the network grows, it becomes more computationally intensive to, calculate those transactions. And the other one is with these calculations, IoT devices are typically resource limited devices. But if we're able to solve those two issues and we can have a sustainable solution for decentralization, then I think that would be huge for the IoT industry.
Well said. I share that sentiment exactly, Justin. I totally understand where you're coming from on decentralization. I think there's a lot of issues right now. In fact, that leads us to our next question. We see, just recently Amazon shut down an entire app, right, for Parler. That's Parler, L-E-R, not Parlor, L-O-R. Parlor is a New York City digital club for 20-somethings and 30-somethings that are trying to make new friends. Totally different. There's an article about this recently. But Parler, yeah, it got shut down. Amazon just pulled the plug, right? So I think it's, and then, you look at like the deplatforming that we've seen, there's been a lot of controversy around that. But more recently, like, deplatforming people that are promoting hate and promoting, certain orange-haired trolls getting deplatformed, right? There's a lot of like pretty crazy stuff that's been going on, in part because these platforms have so much power. So there's seems like there's two sides to this argument. I'm kind of wondering from an IoT perspective, from the perspective of the development of the technology on the IoT side, how good or bad is it that there are pretty much just 3 cloud juggernauts, really, in place right now? Is that a bad thing or a good thing? Let's start with Billie again.
Oh, another really tough one. I think it's even more complicated than that. I don't necessarily know if you can clearly define good versus evil in this scenario. I think that it depends, why having a juggernaut involved is useful to the company and the consumer. And like, if that's about safety and if it's about the restrictions that those huge companies have to go through, then perhaps it is a positive thing. And let's be really frank. If it was a smaller cloud support system, could they really afford to get sued in the same way? Could they really afford to go through the same procedures that these big juggernauts have to go through? I don't know. It's a truthful answer. I have some hope that I think these bigger companies, because they're held under so much scrutiny, will do the right things. I don't know if that will be the case. But I have hope. I'm an optimist at heart.
Well said. Amar, just to get you up to speed, Amar, did you catch all that?
Yes.
Oh, we lost him again. Damn. I think, Madison, if you're moderating or helping, if you could get Amar to join without video.
Yeah, that was my bad. I didn't know he joined. It was a delay. I had already removed him to re-add him, and then he got in, and then he got cut.
Should we blame a cloud service?
We'll try. Yeah, great. The cloud is failing us right now. If Madison, if it does help for him to join without video, that's another option as well. Okay. I know that's not preferable, but if we have to do that, we'll do it. Awesome. Well, I'm glad, Amar, that you were able to at least hear all that, so you're still up to speed on the conversation. Billie, thank you for that input. Do we have a rebuttal? Would anybody like to respond to Billie's?
No. So yeah. In fact, what I feel is that the learning curve or the amount of work that is required to make something really scalable and really global, right? It is just too much, right? And companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they have kind of pumped in billions of dollars to kind of basically scale their platform. So I don't really think that and I have seen companies going by that route to kind of try to use, say, certain open source technologies to kind of build their platforms. But again, even if you take, say, any open source component and to really make something truly your own kind of a thing, still there is a certain, what you can say, the kind of a dependency on that specific component, right? So whether that's an Apache component that you are using or some LGPL kind of a component that you are using, still you are kind of still dependent on the maintenance, the original maintenance of that product, right? So rather than kind of being out there in the open, I would actually prefer and I would actually advise to kind of work with Microsoft, AWS, Google, these say 3 big companies, and again, of course, yes, there is a negative side of it, but on the other side, what we are seeing is that where do you want to really spend your time on, right? Do you want to build your product or do you want to build the infrastructure? And if the infrastructure is readily available and if you can kind of pay for it and use it, then let's go ahead with that.
Right. So what about from a legal perspective? I actually want to ask Edona here. Do you think that they're going to get broken up? What do you think the chances are? What are the chances that Microsoft, Google, or Amazon get broken up? And how would that? How do you think that would, if they did get broken up, how would that affect IoT? Would that be a good thing for IoT or a bad thing for the IoT ecosystem?
Oh, it's such a tough question because being in a law firm with 700 lawyers, I can never I can never comment on any specific entity because we act for institutions, and so I can't really sort of answer that with any specificity. But going back to some of the comments that you mentioned earlier, I think the challenge, there's a few challenges from a legal perspective. I think. And also features. So I'll start with the features first. What Amar and Billie mentioned, I echo those comments because I think there's an element of corporate governance that you have to sort of trust that these companies are doing the right thing. And it's not just because they're following sort of general compliance, but they also have a corporate responsibility to do so and do so it well. What Amar mentioned is also very important. I think it's also a feature of industries that are highly specialized, where it takes a lot of capital in this case, to set up the infrastructure. And I think with that kind of feature as an industry, you're going to end up with sort of key players that almost looks like they hold the market share for that. They are sort of the dominant players, and it's very little room for the little guys to play in that sandbox. I just think that's just a feature of the industry, as with any other sort of high investment kind of industry. The other aspect of it for all players, large and small, and I think for any sort of when you think of sort of the multiple layers of an IoT ecosystem, where you look at the endpoint, you look at data application layer, you look at the network layer, I think, and you have sort of multiple players there. And I'm not even putting in sort of ultimately the consumer, whether that's an organization that's adopting that solution or simply, Joe down the street that's buying that device. I think what you have there is a multitude of roles in that ecosystem that people often undermine, and often those relationships are governed by contracts. And I think what people are doing sort of is operating by boilerplate contracts that have been drafted not for the connected ecosystem. And I think when you think of when you scrutinize those terms a little more, depending on the role that you play in that ecosystem, I think that is the challenge for the players in the industry. Depending on what role you have in that ecosystem, whether you're the provider, whether you're the manufacturer of a particular device, or a manufacturer of a solution that's ultimately used by a manufacturer down the line, whether you're a supplier of something, of an ultimate solution. I think people are not scrutinizing those terms carefully from a contract point of view, and I think it needs to be, because I think it's going to be a source of liability for folks. And the more I speak to both clients and also folks in the ecosystem, I see that that's an area that people are not sort of paying attention to. And part of that is, depending on your role, is that sometimes you have the take it or leave it style contract. This is it. These are our terms. Take it or leave it. Go find somebody else that can give this to you. And I think that forces people to just carry the risk. But those would be some of my comments. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. Let's drill down a little bit into specifics. I know, it's fine, Edona. I know that you can't talk specific companies, but I do want to hear from others. What are your favorites, right? I mean, given there's the big three, Azure, Microsoft, Google Cloud Services, there's some upcomers. Salesforce obviously is doing really great things. IBM has been struggling, but you could argue that they could still take off. Then there's Dojo from Tesla. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Dojo, but Tesla, the car company, has their own cloud services internally that people are predicting that they will then eventually release to the third parties as to compete with Azure and Microsoft. What I'm wondering is, I'm going to ask the audience. Audience, do you know of other cloud services that could disrupt the big three? And if you do, if you could post them to the chat. And what I'm looking for the panel is, what is your favorite platform, and which platforms do you think, at least from the IoT perspective, are gaining the market share the quickest? Now, why don't we start with Justin?
Yeah, so with each cloud provider, they all, even though they all have cloud services, they have their own specializations or their focus. So GCP, they're not that strong in the IoT field, but they have tons of machine learning expertise with BigQuery and TensorFlow. AWS and Azure are somewhat comparable with their IoT. It's interesting that you mentioned Dojo, because that's like a very niche application of high intensive video processing, because that's what Tesla needed. So I think these smaller cloud providers, if they can find these niche markets, then people will come to them for their applications. But I think Azure, AWS, for the IoT and more general services, they'll
Amar, what's your favorite, and which one do you think is growing their market share in IoT the fastest?
Yeah, so like I will go with Microsoft's Azure, right? I mean, and that is something that like we have seen actually like from their past result, which was kind of just announced like a couple of days ago, where I think they had somewhere like 50 or 80% kind of increase in their Azure revenue, right?
Wow.
And that is also kind of something that we are seeing on the ground as well, like for some of the kind of decisions that they have taken in terms of like what is the implementation level detail, etc., that they want to have, and kind of like like how do you kind of open up APIs for other developers to kind of build apps on top of their platform, right? So that is where we have seen them kind of like really investing a lot. And so from IoT side, like like in my book at least, like and from the type of customers that I'm dealing with, like say large enterprises, so Azure kind of fits in very well over there. If it comes to the analytics side, I would say Google certainly has a very good kind of what you can say, kind of offering over there in terms of some of their services, and they are like really far away. But some of the challenges that the industry is kind of seeing is that Google is typically known for its kind of like a short shelf life of their products, right? And that is something that is kind of causing an issue. But from a purely from offering perspective, I think their offerings are pretty well out there.
Billie, you care to comment?
Sure. It's not controversial by any stretch, but we use AWS. But if it was me and I was to do it all again, I would use GCP for those exact reasons that you just went through.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, honestly, the machine learning capabilities are honestly the best in the world that I've ever seen. And I'm so impressed by what the extra offerings are, and I don't get that at the moment.
Interesting. Okay, this is great, and you're off the hook, Edona. You don't have to comment if you don't want to. All right. I don't want to get in trouble with a lawyer here. Okay. So like, let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence for a second here. So, obviously, I mean, Edona, your organization is called AIOT Canada, right? It's not called IoT Canada. And correct me if I'm wrong. That's the A sort of stands for artificial intelligence, right?
Correct.
So. And this acronym makes a lot of sense. I've seen it getting a lot of traction out there in the blog posts I've been reading and some of the conferences I attend. And it sort of seems like the overlap between IoT and the cloud and artificial intelligence, the overlap in that Venn diagram seems to be getting bigger, not smaller. Do you agree with that? Is that overlap getting bigger? And if you do, how do you see that playing out? Like, actually, why don't I ask this question? Do you like the term AIoT? Do you like that term? Do you think it's a good term? Do you think it's a bad term? A. And B, do you see that trend continuing? Do you think that that's going to be, and if you do see it continuing, what are some of the ways that we're going to see this come about? How will from the consumer's perspective, from the general population's perspective, what is it going to look like as AI has a bigger and bigger effect on IoT and cloud? Okay, who wants to start?
Do you want me to comment quickly on how much I like the term or not? Because it's an easy answer. Yeah. I've got to say that before I joined AIoT Canada, someone smarter than me thought of the term, and it was the folks that founded the organization. And I think some of the comments that I've heard from the ecosystem is that that encapsulates sort of where the industry is going, the general direction. So you've had connected devices, just IoT devices. This is not a new thing. It may be new to consumers in terms of adoption right now, or in the last maybe 5 years. But the AI-empowered IoT devices, I think that's where the explosion of that Venn diagram you're talking about, the overlap. And I think that's what we were trying to do as a tech cluster or ecosystem. And I think my prediction is you're going to see more companies playing a larger role in that overlap as we move forward. If the last 2 years has been any indication. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot. Billie, how about you? What do you think of the term AIoT? Is that just another annoying buzzword, or do you think that's a taste of things to come?
I mean, in general, I find acronyms really annoying. And it's because it doesn't really translate across industries. Like now, let's say the fashion industry knows what IoT is, but for a long time they had no fucking clue. And so like adding another A to the front, they're like, is that different? And like, to be truly honest, like the garment industry is still grappling with like how artificial intelligence can be really useful for them if it's not just about selling more product. Which of course it always is going to be about, but there's other experiences they could be building that they're just not doing yet. And so yes, like having an A there is great. I just think there's an educational loop we have to go through to get everyone on board.
Well said. Yeah, good point. Really quickly from Justin and Amar, yay or nay, thumbs up, thumbs down, AIoT, you like it or dislike it? And you care to comment on the future of artificial intelligence effect on IoT?
Yeah, I think so artificial intelligence is certainly a natural extension to IoT. That's how we look at it. For the simple reason is that IoT allows you to kind of tap into some of the unknown data that you didn't have before, right? So for example, maybe I have an asset and I'm collecting some information over there. Now the next set of question is that, okay, what do I do with this data, right? And that is where, and like as AI also requires this kind of like a huge amount of data. So that is where IoT basically acts as a data source for these kind of AI models to learn from the incoming data that is coming in. And that is where we are seeing things like say predictive maintenance, etc. kind of going in. So yes, they are kind of very much complementary to each other. I mean, from the term perspective, yeah, it's a buzzword, but yes, we also see practical applications for it.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Justin, care to comment?
Yeah, I would agree with Amar that the AIoT, the term itself is kind of buzzy, but AI and IoT do go hand in hand because IoT, the devices, you're collecting data, but it's really only useful if you're taking action on it. When most people think of IoT, or if you have an IoT fridge, sure, it can tell you if you don't have any milk in the fridge, but the real value is if it can predict your energy usage and like communicate with other fridges across the grid to manage that power utilization. So that whole application of taking actionable actions on the data is where the value is.
Okay, awesome. That's great. So we're actually at the point now where Billie's got to get going pretty soon. So what we're gonna do, Billie, I'm gonna ask you a quick question just to get things going, and then the audience is gonna ask you some questions before you have to take off. Do I understand correctly? You got to leave at 1:45 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Is that right?
I do. Yes. Apologies.
Oh, bummer. Yeah. So okay, let's do this. Let's start with asking just a really simple question. For you, what has been the hardest part of these sort of IoT product development aspects of your company? I know that you have a wearable that's connected, of course, but what, in terms of product development, what were sort of the biggest IoT development challenges you ran into?
There were so many. Like, this shit's really hard. I think if I could tell myself, my younger self, how hard it would be, maybe I would reconsider some things. But I think what I always want to come back to is like the customer doesn't always know what data is going to be interesting to them. And I don't know yet that we've built infrastructures that allow the customer to get real value from that. And that I think we're still working on. And so it continues to be a challenge. At least with our yoga line, they're able to see and get feedback on how well they do a pose, but they want to know a range of other things around each one of their yoga poses and how regularly they should be doing it. And if they've gone for a run, which poses they should then be doing to stretch. There are a plethora of things that we haven't yet done because we weren't aware that kind of data was going to be valuable to them. And I think this is an ongoing learning, and I think that'll continue to get challenging. But we sort of welcome the challenge. It's part of the experience of building these things.
Can you guys still hear me? I lost my video.
Yep.
Yeah, I got you.
You still hear me? Okay, you don't really need to see me. That's all right. Hopefully Madison can get my video back up. But But yeah, so that's awesome, Billie. We're going to take questions now from the audience. So if people could direct their questions directly to Billie, thank you. That would be really helpful. Just type like question for Billie and then like post it. We've actually got a few questions already that people have posted, which I think were meant for Billie, but let's just check. So scrolling back through the questions, there's been a few good ones here. The first one came from Thomas Winkler from Quest. So generally ecosystems are built around platforms, Android, iOS, obviously, and they're key for a catalyst for making progress in technology adoption. Agreed, of course. For IoT, it seems that despite many competing efforts, the world is still extremely fragmented across all layers: cloud, data, sensors, applications, connectivity. Do we think this will continue in a decentralized way or migrate towards some dominant players? Why don't we start with Billie? Billie, what do you think?
I mean, we're not seeing it go to dominant players yet. And so like, I think there's going to have to be a tipping point at some stage. Well, and maybe that's not true. You can call me on my bullshit too if that's correct. But I don't think there's enough people in markets. See it. Oh, did you lose me?
You're still here, Billie. We can hear you. You lost your video.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it as like market driven. So let's say like, IoT products in the maternity space. There's just like millions of them, and they continue to grow, and it's not centralized at all, and people don't stop building products. Similarly, when it comes to the fitness market.
Let's ask Billie. Let's ask you in a different way here, because I think let's drill down into this a little bit. You're an entrepreneur. You have a company. How risky is it to go all in on one platform, or does it make more sense to try to stay platform agnostic, like using services like Docker, Snowflake? Is there value in intentionally staying platform agnostic? Do you see the value in that?
Yeah, I do. I do see the value in that. It's expensive though, sometimes. In the long run, it's not. But that at least, in the short term has been an approach that we took. I mean, I hope that answers your question. You can tell me if you want me to dive a little deeper.
Okay, no, that's super helpful. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs on the line watching this, and they're looking to a veteran like you for advice. So I think that is pretty helpful. Awesome. Justin, can you comment on that as well? I mean, just in rebuttal to Billie, do you agree with her on that, or what's your opinion in contrast?
Yeah, so the whole thing about diving into a specific cloud provider versus being platform agnostic is really, and it's really a function of time to market. It's slower and more expensive to be platform agnostic, and there's more infrastructure and code to maintain. So that's a trade-off that I think entrepreneurs have to decide themselves is, are they willing to take the risk of being tied to a specific vendor? And if so, like what are those risks versus being able to switch between cloud providers? Okay,
well said. And then so the last question for Billie is a question about decentralization and centralization in general. Like, do you think it's good for the consumer to have decentralization in IoT, like lots of consumer choice from different companies, small businesses, startups, or do you think it's best to have centralization where there's more control over, more standardization over security and it's just, I know you hate it when I oversimplify here, but I can see the look on your face. But if you had to boil it down to sort of greater decentralization in IoT or greater centralization, what would you be in favor of?
I mean, I'm actually in favor of having some of these standards in place. and I think that we do need them. And I think we're sort of in this era of the wild, wild west of this phase where we don't have that yet, which means that it's coming. I do think it's needed. And not everyone's going to enjoy this process. It's not really going to be fun. But I do think it's needed for both protecting the customers, but also for like building really good platforms. And I think that's what we're eventually looking for.
Well said, Billie. On that note, you're free to go. I know you got to run. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and good luck with Wearable X. I can't wait to buy a pair of your yoga pants. I want one for myself as well as my wife. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
brilliant.
thanks again.
Thank you so
Pleasure to
much,
meet you all.
Billie.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take care. Okay, everyone else stay on the line because we've got more questions coming from the audience. I'm going to get us kick-started with a few more questions just to get the creative juices flowing. And then we'll take more questions from the audience. How's that sound for our panelists today? Yeah?
Sure.
A-okay? All right, awesome. All right, cool. So let's ask kind of a funny question here. This is a tough one, and I'm not sure if everyone's going to have a strong opinion on this one way or the other, but I think it's an important question to ask, and it is related to the decentralization question. So we've seen the rise in the last year and a half of edge compute, right? The device that operates on its own on the edge, doesn't need the cloud at all, or maybe it does work with the cloud, but it front loads a lot of the calculations, a lot of the computational power, so that you don't have to do as much cloud communication. Obvious benefits of this are, in some cases, increased security, increased privacy, lower latency. You can also have, in some ways, potentially lower cloud fees, I think, is one of the advantages. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, how far is this trend going to go, right? I mean, is edge compute going to get so big and so powerful that the cloud is just not as important? What is the cloud? Is the edge a threat to the cloud? I guess is maybe what I'm asking. Yeah. Who wants to start first?
I feel like that's a question for engineers here, but I'm going to venture a quick answer to that.
Yeah.
From what I see as a legal observer in terms of what's happening in the industry and just focusing in the space for the last 7 years, I see, from my perspective, I don't see the cloud going anywhere. I see it's going to continue to be the prevalent sort of platform, and I do think that you'll see edge computing sort of become sort of the best use case become the best sort of platform in special use cases where where having that kind of solution is desirable for the actual product, for the actual, so you're going to have it in cases like, I spend a ton of time on connecting autonomous vehicles. I think for higher level autonomy vehicles, you can't do away with real-time decisions on whether you're striking a bird that's on the ground or a human that's crossing the street. And making that real-time decision, you're just going to need the edge computing power. You just have to. Unless, I don't know, unless somebody comes up with, I'm not an engineer, my husband is, he actually develops that kind of technology, but like from my point of view, unless you come up with a replacement to that for those real-time decision-making moments, I think that's where you're going to really need the edge being the solution. But that's my perspective.
Okay, cool. Justin.
Yeah, I think edge computing will become more and more popular. Things like 5G, it'll help with that real-time analysis because, it's higher bandwidth, lower latency, but there's going to be applications where you do need all that processing on the device itself. But then on the other hand, you'll have, when you have like sensors in rural areas where you don't have the compute power for edge computing, so there'll still be the cloud, well integrated into those solutions.
Amar, how about you? What's your can you weigh in on, is the edge going to cannibalize cloud, or do they grow at the same time? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, so the way that I am looking at it is that, the cloud is always going to be there, right? And it is just going to be a portion of like, how much of the cloud is going to be used when, say, the edge is active versus it is not active, right? And a good example of that is that, yes, you want to have as much as decision making at the edge for the real time nature and so on. But at the same time, you want to have some sort of a backhaul with your cloud to do certain things like, say, remote updates, right? So let's say if there is a recall of a particular product, or you want to ship a new software update because maybe there was something wrong that was happening, right? So you want to have that particular channel established between your edge and cloud so that you can kind of keep on updating, your device. And if you look at, say, a device lifecycle, typically a device will go through, 4 different lifecycle events, right? So one is like, your onboarding, like, okay, you go to a store, you buy something, you make it your own, right? So that is like your onboarding side. Then comes the configuration, that is the, the operations of it. So these 3 are completely kind of, edge centric. but the remote update or the kind of maintenance of this particular machine or this particular device, that is something that kind of benefits from the cloud use case.
Well said. Well said. Oh man, I don't understand why sometimes when I talk I get this crazy echo. I hope you guys aren't hearing it. What I would say is that, you know, one thing I've observed that has been absolutely astounding is how much better the engineers and designers can make products when they get the consumer feedback, right? So it used to be that you designed a product, a shoes, for example, and the shoe is a really good example. You make the shoe, you design the shoe, and then, you know, you look at online reviews for feedback, and then you do, you know, maybe a bit of consumer, consumer studies or whatever, right? And then you figure out how to make a better shoe based on that. That is not how, you know, a Tesla works, right? You design a Tesla car, right? They drive the car, and then you see in real time how they drive the car, right? You get to see, like, the feedback is instantaneous, right? So the engineers can improve the product because there's so much data coming off of this car. So, like, when people say, oh, it's, you know, IoT is all about the data, it gives the, you know, it's the Netflix effect, as they say, right? Because all they care about is the data. All they want is the data. It kind of makes these corporations sound like data greedy, right? Like, as if they want the data so that they can advertise to you, right? If you look at Facebook and Google, that is kind of true, right? But if you look at it from the other way around, from the perspective of the product designer wants the data so they can make a better product, right? So this, to me, is the future of IoT on the cloud. Is like, all products are going to get better from the perspective of the consumer if the engineers and designers have the right data in front of them to make the product better. I know that sounds like a big, like, rosy future or whatever, but I really do see this happening right now. And when people start, so this is my next question. This is kind of a long-winded way of building up to my next question. Have you guys ever heard of the Internet of Shit?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this really hilarious website and, like, brand that's kind of devoted to, like, making fun of IoT devices that should have never existed. And so what I wanted to ask you today is, can you think of an IoT device where when you first heard about it, you're like, that's not going to be a thing, but then it did end up being a thing? You know what I mean? Like, a product where you thought it wouldn't be successful because it just seems unnecessary to connect that product to the internet. But then once you saw the internet connected version of it being adopted by consumers, you changed your mind. Can you each think of an example like that? Kind of putting you on the spot here, but feel free to go first if you've already got an example.
I can go.
Oh, please, yeah, go for it.
So I spend some of my time litigating on product liability, and so one of the trends that we've seen is an increase in litigation involving connected products. So one of these, so it's a IoT chastity belt. So connected chastity belt device. I think comedians on late night TV even like had features on this product, but there was a ransomware attack involving this product, I think last year. I Google it because I can't remember what month it was. Well, I guess there was another ransomware attack on January 9th.
Wow.
That's right. So anyway, I'd venture, you know, what would happen to consumers in the case of this ransomware attack of these chastity belts. But when I first heard about the product on Colbert, and I said, oh my gosh, like, I can't imagine what could go wrong with this product. But sure enough, I guess there was a few exampmes of ransomware attacks of this particular product. But
that is crazy. I can't believe that somehow slipped past my radar. I'm on top of my wild and crazy IoT stories. That is insane. That's a good one. Justin and Amar, do you guys have any crazy IoT devices that you never thought would be a thing that have actually had some traction?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, you know, I'm just trying to recall, like, you know, if I had seen something like, you know, at CES or any event like that, because typically, I mean, this is where, like, you know, people are kind of coming up or showcasing at least their crazy ideas. But yeah, I mean, at least I'm not able to recall anything at this moment.
Nothing too crazy, huh? I mean, Amar, I know you work a lot on, like, industrial and commercial applications. So,
Right. Yes.
So those are
yeah.
kind of like, you can see the value in it early on. You can say, well, this is going to save this company this much money.
Yeah.
How about you, Justin? Do you have any crazy examples of IoT devices that became a thing?
Yeah, I mean, just go to CES or like watch any of the previous years of CES, and you'll see a lot of products that don't need IoT, but they have IoT. I think it was last year where Charmin had like internet connected toilet paper delivering robots. So it's like things that you never think to happen. It could have just been a marketing stunt, but if you have a big company like Charmin behind that, then you never know. Maybe they will make it into a thing.
Yeah, that one was ridiculous. We have the inside track on that one. We full disclosure, MistyWest had a hand to play in that device. It was actually a really cool device. I mean, obviously useless, but not useless from a technological standpoint. It used a lot of really like advanced technology to make that toilet paper robot work. So think of it as more of an art project than a useful IoT project is the way I like to look at it. Well, cool. So we're running out of time, so we have to finish up here. I believe we have, Madison, how much time do we have left? Time check. I think we have...
so we have like until, we still have like a little over a half hour left.
Okay, good.
If you haven't already covered many other comments or questions in the live chat, you can feel free to answer some of those. But we're doing great for time.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna switch back to comments and questions from the audience, and then if we run out of those, I've got a couple more ridiculous questions up my sleeve that I've been saving till last. So let's go back to the comments and see what we got. Okay, so a bit of a shout out here to Walter. Thanks to Walter for posting about ThinkK Fest 3.0. Yeah, the link's there for the meetup. Click on that. Looking pretty cool. I appreciate that. We got some great input here from Walter again on edge computing. Thanks for the comment. Looking for some questions. Lots of great comments here, but not a lot of questions. Let's see here. Security and privacy are getting ever more important in this extremely connected world. It's almost impossible to keep track of all the vulnerabilities and update needs. Well said, Thomas. Why don't we turn that into a question? Any comment on the sort of security and privacy aspect of IoT? Do you think things are getting better? Do you think we're making progress there, or are things getting worse? Why don't we start with Edona?
So it's a timely question, Thomas. I saw your comment earlier, and I think what's happening, so I go back in terms of what is the current law. And I think what was an interesting development, certainly last year, was the privacy commissioner. So this is, I'm not sure, Thomas, where you're located, but if you are in Canada, the federal privacy commissioner issued guidance to IoT manufacturers in August of last year. To me, that was a big surprise because we're in pandemic year. I mean, why would the privacy commissioner, why would this be hot on the agenda for the privacy commissioner in a pandemic year? But it was. And I think the reason being is that we're seeing more and more a higher adoption of consumer applications of connected devices. So, and with that, I think regulators are really concerned about the privacy aspect and data security aspect of the data that's flowing with those devices. I think if we can turn in terms of where we are in terms of the current paradigm, we expect privacy reform in Canada to happen pretty soon. But I think there was some helpful guidance from the regulator that I think IoT manufacturers, designers can look to. And I know engineers are echoing your comment earlier, Leigh. I think engineers are really these superbly smart individuals that you give them any limitation at the outset. It could be legal limitations, and they'll incorporate it into the product to have a better product ultimately. So I think if you can incorporate these minimum requirements from the outset, you will have ultimately a better product down the pipeline in the end. So some of the things the regulator talked about And I encourage you to, if you haven't looked at it, look at it. If you're developing products, connected products, the regulator talked about sort of generally privacy accountability, having sort of being meaningful about the handling of information, access, accuracy, and safeguarding that information. Certainly, I mean, something that may surprise a lot of people here today is certainly certain types of metadata may qualify as the type of data that the privacy commissioner will care about, depending on the jurisdiction, depending where that product is and where it operates. So I think there is, if you email me at evil@blg.com, I'll put my email. I'm happy to chat more about sort of those minimum guidance requirements, direct you to the resource at the privacy commissioner as a starting point. I think that was an important document. The other aspect that I wanted to comment on is oftentimes you hear about the law, and it's no surprise why you never sort of hear talk of law at the outset when you're really trying to find funding, when you're trying to develop your product. Reason being is that you don't think of that. Why would you worry about that at that point in time? But I do think that developers and regardless of where your product is in the pipeline, I think you'd get some comfort in knowing that the law doesn't require perfection. So I think as long as there is a reasonableness in play around so in the aspect of privacy, around how data is handled, and if that data has a personal identifiable information feature to it, that you've turned your mind to those minimum compliance elements, I think you're fine. I think you're going to be fine under the law. The law doesn't require perfection, is my point. And I think that should give folks sort of some level of comfort when it comes to the legal paradigm. I think I expanded a little bit more than I wanted to, but happy to chat more about that.
Okay, that's great. No, that's a great answer. I just realized there are questions in like a separate section of this thing that I somehow didn't see before. So we do have 8 questions to get through here, and I'd like to get through all of them if we can. We have a half an hour. So let's kind of do a rapid fire round. I'd like to get just a few sentences from each of you on this first question. Actually, no, the first question is actually directed to Edona, but we're going to skip that for now. We'll come back to it just because you just spoke. So we missed the one for Billie, unfortunately. But to Justin primarily, with the emergence of 5G millimeter wave networks, mobility connections latencies could become very low as 1 millisecond. Do you see advantages in your current IoT product work by utilizing potentially unnoticeable latency? This is from Andrew Schlosser. Justin, go ahead. Justin?
Yeah, so in our specific, the products that we work on, usually the applications don't need this low latency, high bandwidth, internet connected data flow. But with things like self-driving cars where you do need that onboard processing, but also connection to the cloud, like that's really where 5G shines.
Yeah, well said. Amar, can you comment on that as well? How do you think having super ultra low latency 5G connections, how's that going to change things?
Yeah, I mean, so there are certainly certain workloads that we have seen which require kind of this kind of a use case, right? I mean, a very good example of this is like an IP camera. So IP camera will kind of transfer a few MBs of data per second, right? And especially if you want to, let's say, do an AI kind of a workload on this particular camera. Let's say if you want to do something like, say, maybe a compliance check or maybe like a retail heat map and so on. Today, the way that you kind of connect these things together is you basically have like a wire going from the camera over here, right? And that is kind of suitable for kind of very small environments like, say, a retail store and all those particular kind of closed environments. But as you kind of go towards, say, more of a smart city where maybe you want to monitor the traffic patterns by using, say, the camera, and you want to do something else with it. So that is where we are seeing 5G technology kind of playing a role over there because it kind of supports these kind of workloads which require like a high bandwidth, low latency kind of use.
Well said. Well said. All right. Why don't we go back to a question that got the most upvotes to Edona. What are some issues for IoT privacy in healthcare applications? I've seen talk of hospitals with smart building designs. How does this fare with the risk of hacking and files being kept hostage? So you've answered a little bit of this already, but maybe you can.
Yeah. I love the awesome lawyer lady comment. Thanks. That's very nice. I thought it was gonna be boring lady, boring lawyer lady. So I think so. Healthcare is a whole sort of complicated paradigm, and I tell you that because it's a highly regulated industry, both at the federal level and the provincial level. So with that, compared to say other types of if you have a connected device in a highly regulated industry, you're in a little bit of a much more comfortable place when it comes to developing that product. The moment you're going to think of a healthcare application of a product, you're in a completely different universe. You speak about smart buildings, and as with any smart buildings, I mean, the application of smart buildings, like a smart hospital, and there's been some examples in Canada of that. Certainly, the recent one that I've heard of is in York Region in Ontario. But I think the application of smart buildings in healthcare is no different than any other. That's a bit of an exception than any other industry, like a smart building, commercial real estate, a tower in downtown Toronto, for example, or another smart building like in a factory, I don't know, in Vancouver. I think there's going to be aspects of the connectivity features of that building that are going to have to do less with patient care, that are going to take you out of the realm of sort of the health regulatory world when it comes to that to the way that the hospital's smart building infrastructure is managed. Whether it's going to be managed a utilities in the building, whether it's HVAC or water or what have you, and the energy efficiency of the building, or what other elements of connectivity that building has. Timely as of yesterday, actually, and happy to chat to you more about that. There was actually 2 hours dedicated by Alberta IoT specifically to smart buildings, and I was very happy to see applications already of certain vendors in that space of elements of how they manage some of that data, application of what's coming out of those devices that are being used in the smart building ecosystem. Now, your question was, I'm going to go back to your question. So that's for the smart building aspect of things. It doesn't fall prey to necessarily the patient care aspects of things. So that personal health identifiable information, where you then become subject to, say, in Ontario, to the provincial health legislation. So I think at the end of the day, though, as with any type of cybersecurity management incidents, at the end of the day, I think whether they are, it depends on the kind of what's being hacked. It depends on the value of the currency of that data. Suddenly, if it's about patient care information, suddenly that data is going to be much more valuable because you're going to have much more risk as compared to other type of data that's being hacked. Say, I don't know, water use, if they're going to sort of hack that from a smart building. So I think from a risk management perspective, the comfort level in terms of what's being hacked, mind you, what could happen in terms of they gain control of the system, it's a whole different other ball game. But I do think you have less worry in terms of what you're subject to from a regulatory perspective, from a smart building ecosystem kind of data, as compared to, say, a connected medical device, a connected pacemaker.
Well said. Well said. Okay, I think that answers the question. Justin, do either you or Amar want to weigh in on that, or should we move on to another question?
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned pacemakers, because I think it was 2017 where there was a internet-connected pacemaker that basically they found a security vulnerability, and then they had to go through the whole process of administering a firmware update to these pacemakers, because taking them out to do a replacement is way too risky.
And that was
so
actually
one of the risks.
That was actually, for that connected medical device case that you mentioned, that became subject to litigation. That was extremely expensive for the manufacturer. I think they ended up spending millions and millions of dollars in terms of discovery. In the end, it was dismissed. But it gives you an example of the kind of risk that you face, even when the vulnerability becomes known. And then suddenly you have these folks that organize a class to try and get some money out of the product vulnerability. Luckily, from what I've seen, defendants, because I act for defendants, I don't pursue claims. What I've seen is that defendant manufacturers and suppliers that have been involved in those kinds of disputes have been able to defend those kinds of claims pretty successfully. Mind you, it's cost them a bit of money, but they've been able to dismiss those generally.
Oh. All right. Well, let's move on to another one. This is an interesting one. What do you think? Well, this is for the whole panel. So, what do you think will be the catalyst for standardization in IoT? Anyone? You guys know each other well enough now. Just barge in.
Yeah, I think so when we look at standardization, it is at different levels and across different industries, right? So in certain industries, we are already seeing some some effort going on in terms of like standardization. So this is kind of specific to, let's say, if you take a manufacturing plant, and if the manufacturing plant has, say, 10 different variety of machines, they want the protocols or the data that is coming from these machines to be kind of getting consolidated, and also to kind of build some logic by using the inputs from one machine and connecting it to the other machine, right? So today, this is kind of very segregated, that is there, but there are certain efforts that are going on, like to have certain common protocol layer kind of created, which allow this kind of a information exchange between kind of a heterogeneous systems. This is something that, again, from a very industry specific. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that much on the consumer space. But again, the other folks are they can add in their perspective.
I think we lost Leigh.
I'm still here. What do you guys think? Did we get a rebuttal? Anyone?
Justin, I'm going to let you respond to that, and I'm going to have my perspective.
Oh, I was going to say the standardization, I think, is more important on the regulatory side around like security and conformance, because especially security is a huge problem with IoT. Like there's this whole botnet issue where, Wi-Fi cameras and like fridges and whatever else is connected to the internet, they are all taken over, and there's a DDoS attack that took down like Netflix, Amazon, Airbnb, and all they had to do was they had 64 common passwords that they just tried out on these open devices, and they got control of like 500,000 devices. So basically, there needs to be regulation around that and prevent it from happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have a few more questions here to burn through, and a few more popped up in the comments page as well. So here's an interesting question. I'm not sure, Roberto, if I completely understand your question, so you might have to provide some clarification here. But the question is, where can I get immersed in IoT, either for business purposes or solutions development? So I think what Roberto is asking here is, like, what is a good way for him to further immerse himself in the IoT industry, either presumably as an entrepreneur or a business developer, or maybe he's referring to, he says solutions development. He's probably talking about being an applications engineer or a systems engineer. I'm going to direct this one to Justin, because Justin, I know you know a lot about this topic. Any advice for Roberto?
Yeah, if you want to understand like what the trends of IoT are, there's a lot of like publications that you can follow in terms of applying solutions. Actually, one of the things about Azure is they have a platform called Azure IoT Central, which basically provides like off-the-shelf end-to-end solutions for common scenarios like device tracking and management, fleet management, those types of things. So that could be a good place to start if your application fits into that area. I'm not quite sure if that answered your question. But
Amar, do you have any tips for Roberto?
Yeah, I think what I think Roberto can kind of start off with is doing something simple like the IoT Central use case that was pointed out earlier. That is a very quick way of kind of connecting any devices to the cloud and even seeing the data on the dashboards, right? And then he can basically take an iterative approach that, okay, if he has to focus specifically on, say, the device side or on the cloud side or the layer in between, like say the connectivity protocols, etc. I mean, that is where I mean, he can basically do a deep dive on.
Okay, great. Let's do another question here from the audience. Hardware development, product characterization. Do you see this mostly driven by big companies, or do you see room for others to break in? This is a comment from Edgar. Edgar, can you clarify when you say hardware development, product characterization, are you referring to others breaking into these industries as consultants or as product companies? Can you clarify, Edgar, in the comments? But for now, we'll see. Yeah, go ahead.
Leigh, I just put in, I just wanted to let people, so I didn't put any commentary, but for Roberto's question, I don't know, Roberto, if that, I use that website, IoT World Today, sort of as a collection of news on, to keep up with IoT generally. It's a good site for others as well. Nice,
thank you, Edona, that's perfect. That's exactly.
Especially for a non-engineer, if you're a non-engineer like me.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, just going to this next question here. Edgar, I see that you're active in the comments there. If you can just clarify your question from which perspective. But I think what Edgar's asking is, like, is there room for hardware development companies and product characterization companies, or is that more of a is there room for new companies in those industries, or is it more dominated by big companies already? I mean, I'll speak briefly for MistyWest, right? Like, MistyWest is a hardware development company, right? We specifically do hardware development in IoT, and we're not a big company, we're small, but we're a consultancy, right? So we don't make our own products, we make products for our clients, right? And so Edgar, can you clarify if you mean on the consultancy side or on the, let's assume that what Edgar means is on the product, let's talk about product characterization. Is there room for product characterization businesses that offer that as a service? Go ahead, panel, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so I think I can kind of comment on this one. So we actually see a lot of gap over here, right? And there is actually an opportunity for companies to kind of fill in this gap, because if you take a look at the large platform players, I mean they are kind of building their platform. They have got very general purpose devices, right? And these particular devices are kind of meant for, let's say, your 80% or 90% of the use cases. The problems that kind of end up at some of these particular, say, the IoT implementation, at least traditionally in the industrial area, what we are seeing is that there is a need for a lot of kind of customization. Even the scale could vary from, say, few hundreds of devices to, say, maybe say 10,000 devices, right? It might not go towards the millions of devices. I mean, if you are targeting, say, from a industry, a particular specific industry, or a particular kind of vertical inside of it. But this is where, like, like even companies like, say, Quest Global, MistyWest, they kind of are coming into picture to kind of help kind of fulfill that particular gap and need.
Well said. It's like if I don't talk for a while, as soon as I talk, I sound like a monster. Is anybody else hearing that? Is it just me?
Yes, we definitely are.
Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. I don't know what's causing that. It's some kind of microphone recalibration. Speaking of Internet of Things, if someone could invent a better microphone, that'd be great. All right, cool. Justin, do you have any? Justin or Edona, do you have any comments on the matter?
No.
Yeah, I would just echo what Amar said. I would echo what Amar said. There's always going to be room for small players because of these highly customizable or applications that need this high customization. Because with big companies, or basically if you get a generic solution, then you'll have generic results, and that doesn't provide as much value to your business.
Okay, helpful. Donna, any comment there?
No.
All right, cool. Let's move on. We got some more questions here. We already talked about standardization. Madison, if you could clear out the questions that have already been answered, awesome. Thank you. Did we already answer this one? I don't think we did. What do you guys think about cross-platform device communication? Like thermostats want to exchange information with smart doors via local communication instead of the cloud. So this is a question about IoT, where devices don't have to connect to the internet, go to outer space, right? Go to China and then to the US and then back. Just these two devices are so close together one of them is an Amazon product, one's a Google product. Why can't they just talk to each other? I think that's what this person is, Charing is their name, seems to be asking. What do you guys think of that? What's the future look like with respect to dissimilar platforms talking to each other? Do you see hope there, or is it getting worse or better, or what?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, like, and again, like, I mean, I haven't worked in this particular space, like on the consumer side, but again, I am a user of some of these particular consumer products. And what I would say is that actually it is getting worse, right? And that is like one of the primary observation over here is that companies are becoming like too siloed. For example, like if you have a Ring doorbell, the only way that you can access that doorbell is via their app, right? And yes, I mean, there are other integrators that are there. Maybe, hey, if I want to connect it to my Alexa or say other device, but again, it like kind of you have to go through their kind of a pipeline for the same. And the same thing that we are kind of that I have actually seen it for, say, other use cases, like, okay, if you have a Philips Hue connected light bulb, it is also kind of like being in the same way. So I mean, for a local communication, yes, I mean, I know what needs to be done, right? I mean, for that you need to have like a local gateway which kind of connects these particular devices together. Now, who is going to kind of provide that gateway, right? I mean, is it going to be your Google or the Amazons who are going to provide that gateway, or is it something else? So there is this, kind of a certain bit of work that has to kind of go in at each of these particular devices side to kind of expose certain APIs and endpoints for us to, let's say, locally control them, and also like at a gateway level whereby it can talk about different protocols for all of the different variety of protocols or the different endpoint devices that you have at your home.
Okay. Well said. Well said. So we have time for one last question here. There's so many good ones that are remaining. So I feel it's hard. It's kind of hard to choose, but okay. So I think this is the right question to ask. It's a kind of an amalgamation of a couple of different questions, but I guess the question is what should product developer, engineers, and startup entrepreneurs be thinking when they're thinking about adding IoT to a product? Like they've got let's say they're a traditional product company, maybe a garment, maybe a piece of clothing, maybe it's a kitchen device, or a plant pot holder, just some kind of generic, like usually like non-connected device. And the company is like, let's make this a connected device, right? It's going to be better because we'll be able to have a stronger connection with the consumer. There'll be a digital afterlife to the product. We'll be able to get consumer feedback data. So of course they want that data, right? Of course they want the connectivity of the device. But my question is, what should they be thinking as a decision maker? What is your advice to them to make sure that they make something that people actually want? So this will be our final question. What advice do you have to these product developers and entrepreneurs to make sure that what they're working on is something that people actually want? I think that's an amalgamation of like 3 of the questions that were all asked. So forgive me those who didn't get their precise question asked.
I'm happy to tackle that if that helps.
Yeah. Donna, you first.
I think the bottom line is what is the value proposition for that product, and what is it trying to meet? I think the more focused you are in trying to solve a solution out in the real world, I think the better chance that product will have in the end. And I think for in the IoT connected world, I think that those with the brains to be able to solve the world's problems with connected devices, I think are already almost innately do that, Leigh. I'd venture to say that. The trouble I think entrepreneurs face is funding. That's what I hear all the time as a lawyer. Like once they make it, depending on where the maturity of that is really funding. Is not necessarily in terms of coming up with something that is solving for something in the real world, but I think value proposition. But I think at the end of the day, what your challenge of that is the funding to make that, to commercialize that technology in the end.
Okay, awesome. Well said. Like that's all. We're off to a good start on this question. Tough act to follow. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's like even with non-IoT product or development, with product development, the main thing is to get feedback from your users as early as quickly, or as early as possible. Iterate a lot, because what you think your customers want might not be in line with what they actually want. And once you start providing them with the data, things can change. And the problem with IoT is that so much data is available that you think, oh yeah, my customers want this, my customers will want that. But yeah, it's basically getting that iteration and that feedback loop during the product development.
Well said. Amar, closing remarks with respect to this question and
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just to add to what to some of the points that were earlier covered, like I think whether to go do IoT or not to do an IoT, I mean that should be a kind of a what entrepreneurs should understand is that there is a certain cost to it, right? And so unless and until there is not a clear plan for the ROI, like the return on investment, that okay, after doing this, how am I going to recoup this particular cost? Till that time, they shouldn't be basically taking this decision. Because we have seen a lot of failures where people wanted to go the IoT route, but they did a POC and then they basically just stalled at the POC, because taking it to production and how do you kind of make money on that particular investment that you have done, they didn't have a very good understanding about it, right? So I think like this ROI definition is what is extremely important to kind of choose this particular route.
Got it. Awesome. Well, that's great. I think that kind of concludes things. Madison, take us away here.
Thank you, Leigh. Okay, I just have some closing slides quickly, and then I will paste any more links to things in the chat.
I am dying to know though, what broke? Is it a glass or something? Who broke a glass?
Something smashed.
That was me.
All right. Okay.
He's just playing it cool. All right, can you guys see my screen? I'll take your silence as a yes.
I can see it.
Okay. So I want to thank all of our panelists for today. This was a really great discussion. I learned a lot as well. I am not an engineer, so I am still always learning while working at MistyWest to expand my knowledge on technology and futuristic technologies. For our panelists here, if you guys want to share any contact information in the chat for people to get in touch with you after this, please feel free. And just again, my name is Madison. I'm the organizer of our Vancouver Hardware Meetups. If you have any suggestions for topics, you want to speak in a webinar, want to sponsor or partner with us for an event, feel free to email me at madison@mistywest.com. We've been shifting our focus at MistyWest in the last year to focus more on IoT engineering and development. So we have some upcoming events planned over the next few months that will be something partnering with Nordic Semiconductor. We are planning an event around assistive technology, and other ones include agritech and IoT security. So if you are a specialist in any of those industries or know somebody that is, please feel free to get in touch with me, or even Leigh or Justin, anybody else at MistyWest, and we can discuss putting together an event. And yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. It was a really great discussion. Everybody seemed to have lots of questions, and you feel free to follow us on any of the social channels that are listed here. And I will also paste the link to our meetup group in the chat. We have over 1,400 members, and it'll be the first place you hear for the next events that we end up announcing. So I'd just like all of our panelists just if you guys have any last remarks, just to close it out. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you everyone for joining. Madison, thank you for putting this event together. It's been fantastic. This is one of our more successful, huge turnout. Wow, huge number of people. I'm just blown away. And just thank you so much to our panelists. panelists, Edona, Justin, Amar, and Billie, who's not here anymore. You've been wonderful. We really appreciate your time, and can't thank you enough. So thank you, everybody, for joining today. That's it for me. I guess what do we do now? Just hang up?
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Oh, and I'll give a shout out to Leigh for doing a great job at moderating as well. Thank you so much, Leigh.
Thanks, Leigh.